General Hospital spoilers reveal that Rocco's life had always been a delicate balance between love and confusion, loyalty and curiosity, and now that balance was teetering on the edge of collapse. Largely because of Liesl. The once joyful, spirited boy who had found solace in the presence of his parents, Lulu and Dante, was slowly being consumed by doubt and resentment. All fueled by Liesl's insidious influence. Liesl, who had never been shy about imposing her will or her version of the truth, had begun to infiltrate Rocco's mind in subtle, almost imperceptible ways at first, but the consequences of her manipulation were quickly becoming evident. Each time Rocco spent time with Liesl, he returned to his parents less confident, more defensive, and increasingly convinced that the people who were supposed to care for him had failed him in ways both significant and unspoken. Liesl had a gift for storytelling. A way of presenting events so that the listener could not help but sympathize with her perspective, and Rocco, searching desperately for understanding and guidance, was the perfect target for her influence. She painted pictures of neglect and emotional distance, reminding Rocco of the years when Lulu had been trapped in a coma, when Dante had struggled to balance his responsibilities, and when he had felt abandoned or overlooked. To a child with a natural longing for stability and affection, these reminders were poisonous. They were facts, yes, but framed in a way that made it feel as though he had been purposefully set aside, as though his needs had never mattered to the people he had once trusted most. Liesl did not need to lie outright, she simply emphasized what she knew would cut deepest, what would plant seeds of doubt and cultivate resentment. Rocco's transformation did not happen overnight. But it happened steadily, undeniably, and the results were now impossible to ignore. Where he had once run into Lulu's arms, thrilled at her attention, he now hesitated, questioning her motives, wondering whether she had ever truly wanted him. Where he had once sought Dante's guidance, he now challenged him, arguing, resisting. Liesl had taught him to look at their past through a prism of betrayal and emotional neglect, and the prism was coloring everything he saw, and the moments when he had felt unseen or unheard. Liesl encouraged these reflections, never confronting him directly with commands to rebel, but simply validating his feelings and presenting herself as the one who truly understood him. Rocco, in turn, began to internalize these notions, feeling as though his loyalty had been misplaced. The impact of this manipulation was multifaceted. On a practical level, Rocco began asserting his independence in ways that alarmed both Lulu and Dante. He refused to follow household rules, questioned decisions, and increasingly sought out Liesl's guidance over theirs. He asked to stay longer at her residence, requested her opinion on matters he had previously brought to Lulu or Dante, and even began planning future interactions that would minimize his parents' involvement. Emotionally, he was pulling away from the people who had nurtured him. It was as though every act of care from Lulu or Dante was now filtered through a lens of suspicion, every word of encouragement doubted, every show of affection questioned. Relentless influence. On a deeper psychological level, Liesl's effect on Rocco was creating a profound internal conflict. He felt torn between the natural love he had for Lulu and Dante and the new narrative he was absorbing about their supposed failures. He felt guilt for feeling anger toward them, shame for questioning their intentions, and confusion as to whether his own emotions were valid. Liesl did not deny his guilt or shame, instead, she used them as tools. Framing his resentment as a necessary step toward recognizing truth, framing his rebellion as a courageous act of self-awareness. She reminded him that he had been overlooked, that his experiences had been minimized, and that he deserved to question authority figures who had not met his needs. Rocco, desperate for affirmation, began to see Liesl not as a manipulator but as an ally, a safe harbor from the disappointment and perceived betrayal of his parents. Each conversation reinforced this bond, and each interaction deepened the rift that was forming between him and Lulu and Dante. His rebellion was no longer minor or experimental, it was a deliberate realignment of his loyalties. An emotional pivot that left his parents increasingly powerless to reach him. The most alarming consequence of Liesl's influence, however, was Rocco's emerging willingness to act on his new beliefs. Where he had previously merely expressed doubt or frustration, he was now considering actions that could have long-term repercussions for his family. He resisted guidance. And that Dante had prioritized other responsibilities over his needs. The depth of his conviction suggested that this was no longer a fleeting phase but a fundamental shift in his perception of his family. Liesl's influence had taken root so completely that Rocco seemed willing to sever ties entirely, a possibility that both terrified and devastated Lulu and Dante. The emotional stakes were immense. As they faced the prospect of losing not just the affection of their son, but the very sense of connection and shared history that bound them together. Rocco's actions were a shock not only to his parents but to everyone around him. Those who had witnessed the once happy family dynamic were stunned by the sudden intensity of his rebellion. By the way he articulated grievances that had never been discussed openly before. The revelation that Liesl had such a profound impact on him made the situation even more disconcerting. It became clear that her influence was not superficial. She had fundamentally altered Rocco's understanding of his parents and their intentions. She had created a scenario in which the child's love and loyalty were now contingent upon her interpretations and her framing of past events. A situation that had escalated to the point of emotional crisis. Every act of defiance, every expression of anger or frustration, now carried the weight of manipulation. Making it difficult for Lulu and Dante to discern what was genuine rebellion and what was a manufactured response to Liesl's carefully orchestrated narratives. The consequences of this manipulation extended beyond the household, affecting family dynamics, friendships, and community perception. Dante and Lulu found themselves on the defensive. Constantly explaining themselves, trying to mitigate Rocco's misconceptions, and attempting to re-establish a bond that was slipping further with each passing day. Rocco, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated from his parents' guidance, turning to Liesl not only for affirmation but for decision-making, moral support, and emotional validation. Liesl had succeeded in positioning herself as a primary figure in Rocco's life, a fact that neither Lulu nor Dante could ignore. As the situation escalated, the emotional intensity grew. Each parental attempt to assert authority was met with resistance, each display of affection or concern was interpreted as insincerity. And each effort to bridge the gap was undermined by Liesl's subtle commentary. The household became a battleground of competing narratives. As it became clear that this was not a temporary phase but a deeply ingrained behavioral and emotional transformation. Liesl's manipulation had created a ripple effect that impacted every relationship, every decision, and every emotional exchange. And even refuses to engage in family rituals or events unless Liesl is present to supervise or approve. His defiance is no longer quiet or subtle, it is a conscious, deliberate assertion of independence that challenges both the authority and the emotional bonds of his parents. The community, friends, and extended family are all watching with concern. Recognizing that Liesl's influence is not just psychological but behavioral, shaping the very actions Rocco takes and the relationships he maintains. This culmination of manipulation, rebellion, and emotional turmoil represents one of the most significant shocks in the ongoing narrative. A turning point that will likely have lasting implications for the Falconeri family and their extended connections. Rocco's situation serves as a case study in the power of influence and the fragility of family. Rocco's anger reaches new heights as he witnesses the unimaginable. What was once a protective and loving relationship now seems fractured beyond repair, with the actions of Dante and Chase pushing Rocco into an uncharted territory of fury and disillusionment. Rocco's protective instincts, usually reserved for his family, are now directed outward, towards Danny, and his anger grows as he grapples with the betrayal he perceives from those he once trusted. This new emotional adjustment, Rocco's shift from a confused and angry boy to a dark, determined force, is becoming more evident with each passing day. The narrative of Rocco's internal struggle is now moving toward a place where his moral compass is being pulled in dangerous directions. Rocco has always been loyal. And in some twisted sense, it becomes his weapon. Liesl's influence looms large, intensifying Rocco's emotions and subtly reinforcing his belief that family bonds are frail and easily broken. He's no longer the same boy caught between conflicting emotions but someone willing to go to extremes to defend what he perceives as right. Dante. What started as a professional choice has morphed into a personal betrayal, not just of Danny, but of his own son. The mental toll on Dante is visible. as the weight of his actions presses down on him with each passing moment. His rationality slips away, replaced by paranoia and fear of the consequences, not just from Rocco, but from the fallout with his family. Dante feels trapped in a nightmare of his own making, unable to find a way out. For Rocco, watching Dante's self-doubt and collapse only adds fuel to the fire. The more he sees Dante falter, the more Rocco feels justified in his actions. He is no longer just a bystander in this family drama but an active participant in the darkness that has begun to overtake them all. His feelings of abandonment, combined with Liesl's subtle manipulation, make him believe that those closest to him are incapable of providing the protection he craves. He begins to view his role in the family as one of resistance, pushing against the control and authority of his parents and embracing a darker path, one where he becomes the protector of those who, like Danny, need defending. Rocco's transformation into someone willing to cross lines for the sake of protecting his allies is a direct reflection of the growing tension between the core family dynamics. His shift toward becoming a more dangerous, unpredictable character is the culmination of his internal battle, the one between the innocence of a boy who trusted his parents and the hardened resolve of a young man who has learned the bitter lessons of betrayal. Rocco is no longer simply reacting to events, he is actively shaping his own narrative, one where the traditional roles of family loyalty and love no longer hold sway. As this new obsession with protecting Danny and others in his inner circle develops, Rocco's actions become more extreme. The once calm and composed boy is now capable of anything to ensure that those he feels responsible for are kept safe, even if it means defying his parents or tearing apart the family unit. His sense of right and wrong is blurred, shaped by his experiences and Liesl's calculated words. What is striking about Rocco's journey is the way his protective instincts have morphed into something darker, something akin to vengeance. He becomes less about maintaining family unity and more about dismantling the world that has caused him pain, and in doing so, he starts to mirror the very darkness he's trying to fight against. Dante's breakdown, meanwhile, is part of a larger, more disturbing trend. The consequences of his actions are snowballing, and as he sees his son increasingly lost to him, the unraveling becomes almost impossible to stop. Dante has crossed a line in his pursuit of justice, and now he must face the consequences of a choice he cannot undo. His world is crumbling around him as Rocco's rebellion grows stronger, and the mental strain of it all is beginning to take its toll. What started as a professional decision to arrest Danny has now escalated into a personal crisis of identity and authority. Dante is no longer sure who he is or what his family is becoming. The emotional cost is staggering, and as Rocco pushes him further into a corner, it becomes clear that the consequences of his choices may be far worse than he could have imagined. This tragic turn of events illustrates just how far-reaching the impact of Rocco's transformation is. His anger, directed at his parents and now at the world around him, continues to escalate. Rocco's rebellion is no longer just a reaction to familial disappointment, it is a full-fledged attempt to rewrite the rules of loyalty and love within his family. This isn't just a teenage rebellion, it's a psychological transformation that could change the entire trajectory of his life and those around him. As Liesl's influence deepens, and as Rocco becomes more certain of his new role as protector, the family he once knew is slipping further away. His decision to align himself with those he believes truly care about him, such as Danny, will likely lead him down a path that pushes him further from his parents. And the divide between them will only grow. The true shock of this development is that Rocco is no longer just the product of his parents' love or mistakes. He is becoming something entirely different. His behavior is not a mere reflection of his family's actions, but an embodiment of everything Liesl has whispered into his ear. This change in Rocco isn't just about rebellion. It's about his psychological metamorphosis into someone capable of doing whatever it takes to keep his chosen family intact. The new obsession, the new darkness growing within him, is undeniable, and it is likely to be one of the central conflicts that will define Rocco's future. For Dante, the growing rift with Rocco is a nightmare he cannot escape. His past decisions, which were meant to be for the greater good, have backfired. And now he faces a son who is increasingly unwilling to forgive or understand him. The chaos of the situation is escalating. What started as a father's misguided attempt to protect his family has now become the very thing that threatens to tear it apart. Dante's sense of control is slipping, and as Rocco's rebellion grows, he realizes that the path forward may be one where reconciliation is no longer possible. In the end, this new shock, Rocco's rebellion and Dante's descent into emotional turmoil, is only the beginning. With Liesl's dark influence continuing to shape Rocco's choices, the future of the Falconeri family remains uncertain. What happens next will undoubtedly determine not just Rocco's fate, but that of everyone involved in this increasingly destructive web of manipulation, betrayal, and rebellion. The family as they knew it is gone, and only time will tell if any of them can survive the storm that has been unleashed. Liesl's excitement could barely be contained as she prepared for Britt's return. After months of uncertainty, the thought of her daughter re-entering the fold was almost too much to bear. Britt was more than just a daughter to Liesl, she was a symbol of everything Liesl had fought for. Everything she had sacrificed. But as Britt prepared to make her return, Liesl's joy was not without its complications. There was an undercurrent of something darker, something unsettling that Liesl had been preparing herself for. This excitement, mixed with an unspoken obsession, hinted at Liesl's growing fixation on not just Britt's return, but the control and influence it would bring her. Britt's arrival was, for Liesl, a confirmation of her own power and dominance. She was ready to reclaim her position in the family, to solidify her role as the central figure, the one who would orchestrate the dynamics around her. But this was no longer just about motherly love or the simple joy of reunion. There was something more dangerous at play, a growing sense of urgency to control and manipulate those around her. Liesl was eager to have Britt back, but what she truly desired was the ability to shape Britt's decisions, her actions, and ultimately her relationships. As Britt's return loomed closer, Liesl's obsession grew stronger. This wasn't just a mother's joy over reuniting with her daughter, this was a power play. Liesl knew that Britt's presence would shift the balance of everything, and Liesl was determined to ensure that she held the reins. But there was a new element at play, one that Liesl hadn't anticipated, Rocco's increasing interactions with Britt. Rocco, confused by the fragmented family around him and still deeply affected by his experiences, found himself gravitating toward Britt, who had always been a more constant presence in his life than his parents had been during their struggles. Rocco's need for maternal figures, for someone who could understand his turmoil, led him to seek out Britt. Liesl saw this connection as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave her more control over Rocco, whom she had already subtly manipulated. But on the other hand, Britt's return and Rocco's closeness to her threatened to throw Liesl's carefully constructed plans into chaos. Liesl could manipulate Rocco, but Britt was a wild card. Britt had her own plans, her own struggles, and her own desires that could very well undermine Liesl's carefully laid schemes. Rocco's growing bond with Britt was not lost on Liesl. She observed their interactions closely, reading between the lines of their conversations and noticing the subtle shifts in Rocco's behavior. The more he turned to Britt for guidance and comfort, the more Liesl saw her own control slipping through her fingers. Britt, unaware of the full extent of Liesl's manipulation, was just trying to reconnect with her family. But her presence in Rocco's life was creating a ripple effect that could not be ignored. Liesl's fixation on Britt's return had now evolved into something more controlling, more insidious. She needed to ensure that Britt was not just back in her life but that she was under her influence, just as Rocco was, and this time, the stakes were higher. The tension between Liesl's desire for control and Rocco's growing independence was becoming more evident with each passing day. Liesl wanted Britt to fit into the narrative she had constructed. A narrative where she controlled not just her daughter but the family dynamic as a whole. Rocco, however, was beginning to forge his own path, influenced more by his interactions with Britt than by Liesl's carefully crafted words. Liesl's carefully orchestrated family reunion was now in jeopardy, as Rocco's loyalty was being tested. The shift in Rocco's behavior, and his increasing closeness to Britt, represented a new phase in Liesl's obsession. The carefully controlled narrative she had created for so long was starting to unravel, and she knew it. Britt's return was supposed to be her moment of triumph. A chance to reclaim control over the family she had always wanted to dominate. But Rocco's actions, and his growing bond with Britt, were slowly eroding that control. Liesl had always been the one pulling the strings, but now she was starting to feel as though she was losing her grip. The dynamic between Liesl, Britt, and Rocco was shifting in ways that none of them could have predicted. Liesl's obsession with controlling her family, and her desire to shape the lives of those around her, was becoming more pronounced. She was no longer just a mother waiting for her daughter's return, she was a woman who would stop at nothing to ensure that Britt, and now Rocco, were under her influence. As the tension between them escalates, the question becomes not just about who will control the family, but who will be left standing when the dust settles. Liesl's growing obsession, her need to manipulate, and her fear of losing control are setting the stage for a dramatic showdown that could change everything for the Falconaries. As Britt's return draws closer, the emotional and psychological stakes are rising, and Liesl is becoming more desperate. Rocco's increasing interactions with Britt are only the tip of the iceberg. Liesl's fixation on keeping control is becoming an all-consuming force that threatens to destroy everything she has worked for. The lines between love, control, and obsession are becoming dangerously blurred, and as Liesl continues to maneuver her way through this increasingly complex family dynamic, the consequences of her actions are becoming more unpredictable. One thing is certain, Britt's return will not just be a reunion, it will be the beginning of a new, darker chapter in their lives. One where Liesl's obsession may be the driving force behind the chaos that is about to unfold.